everybody, and welcome to another video. Today I've got something sort of a little bit different, kind of, I guess, a kind of list video, but I decided why not do a video of my favorite albums of the first half of this year. Not necessarily just my favorite albums. I'll be going through every album that I've heard so far this year and kind of ranking them from my least favorite to my favorite. So it's not just my favorite albums. Just felt like doing this because there's been a lot of albums that have come out this year already that I have enjoyed. I kind of want to talk about them now. It's coming to the end of June pretty soon. I figured why not just do a list of all of the albums I've heard so far this year for the first half. Then at the end of the year do kind of a cumulative, like, full year sort of thing. Now there are actually plenty of albums that have come out already this year that I have not heard. Just as some examples, there's a bunch of black metal albums that have come out this year that I haven't heard. I'm subscribed to a channel on YouTube called Black Metal Promotion. They upload, usually albums, they upload at least 2 a day. So I have plenty to check out with that. This isn't like everything that I'm interested in that's come out so far this year, but it's just the ones that I've heard. Pretty much it's just going to be from January to June, not including anything from July or anything, because of course I haven't heard it yet, although some of my most anticipated albums of the year are actually coming out in July. But anyways, I'm going to try to keep most of these fairly short because I have 24 albums here, all of them that I have heard this year, so I'm going to try to keep everything fairly short so this video isn't 30 minutes long. So the first one up at the very bottom, the bottom 3 are kind of difficult for me to place. I think they're all about equal, but at the very bottom at number 24 I have the latest In Flames album, which is I the Mask. Now, I'm not a massive fan of In Flames. I do like them. To an extent, it's a return to form. It's got a little bit more of the melodic death metal side of things that the band has been known for in the past, but kind of mixed with the newer stuff that they do, but to me, it's just very mediocre. There's really nothing about it that's worth going back to. I mean, there's a few good songs, sure. The title track is pretty good. I'm Above is a solid song. I also think Burn is pretty alright. But overall, it's just not really, in my opinion, it's not really worth your time. Next up at number 23, I got Meadows End, The Grand Antiquation. This is an album that I was kind of looking forward to. I mean, I'm not really a fan of this band. I'm not too familiar with them, but I saw some videos of some of the singles from this album, and I thought it seemed pretty promising. It's a melodic death metal. It's a symphonic melodic death metal album, basically, and a band that does that sort of style. So in theory, I feel like I should love this because I love symphonic elements in metal, and I love melodic death metal, but this album really didn't do much for me. Maybe I'd have to listen to it some more to have it grow on me, I don't know. But it really didn't do anything for me, it just, again, seemed pretty mediocre. Next up, we've got No More Hollywood Endings by Battle Beast. Battle Beast is a band that I like, but I'm not super into, at least not as much as bands of a similar style like Powerwolf and Sabaton. But I do like them, and I gotta say, I didn't really care for this album too much. Again, it was decent. I still enjoyed listening to it. I mean, I still enjoyed listening to I the Mask and The Grand Antiquation as well, but I didn't think they were anything incredible. Kind of the same thing with this one. I mean, there are some decent songs on here. I think the title track is pretty good, for example, and there's a couple other songs that are alright, but overall it's just not really that great of an album. Next at number 21 is one of the biggest disappointments of the year for me so far, which is Verkleiden by Soilwork. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the album name correctly, but oh well. This album was one I was actually really looking forward to. I'm not a massive Soilwork fan, although I do think their previous album, The Ride Majestic, is one of the best melodic death metal albums that I've ever heard. I do still think they are a great band for sure. And the singles seem very promising for this album. The first one, Arrival, is a fantastic song, so is Stalfagal. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. And then Full Moon Shoals was good, not as good as the other two, but still quite good. So that gave me high hopes for this album, but it ended up really disappointing me. It was still good, sure, but it wasn't nearly as good as The Ride Majestic. Overall, it was just kind of a disappointing album, and there's a few of those this year, unfortunately. Next up, I've got Gods Without a Name by Aoratos. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing them right either. They're a band that I discovered through that black metal promotion channel. They uploaded this album. I thought the album art looked freaking amazing, and unfortunately that is the best thing about this album. Yes, it's decent, it's not bad, I mean it's still enjoyable to listen to, but it really doesn't do anything to set itself apart. I remember nothing about this album basically, aside from the album artwork is awesome. Not really anything worth going back to, but it's still a decent album. Next I've got Forgotten Past by Sayor. This is a band, again, that I am not a huge fan of, although I have been a fan of them for a couple of years now. I've never really looked into them that much, but I do enjoy them. And this was a good album, but it's not one, again, that I really go back to all that much. It's kind of black metal mixed with folk metal a little bit. Folk metal is pretty hit or miss for me, but it was a good album, but it wasn't anything incredible in my opinion. Next up, we've got the biggest disappointment of the year so far, for me at least, and that is Berserker by Amon Amarth. Amon Amarth has been one of my favorite bands for a few years now. They were the first melodic death metal band I ever got to, and I still love them. I think they're a great band. I think if you're a fan of melodic death metal, they are one of the essentials. This album really didn't do much for me. Yes, it still has a few decent songs like Raven's Flight and Mjolnir Hammer of Thor, which in my opinion is the best song on the album, one of the best songs they've done in recent years actually. Overall, the album didn't do much for me. Sure, they tried some newish things, they kind of tried to experiment a little bit with their sound, but I don't really think it worked out all that well. Maybe I'll need to listen to this one some more as well to have it grow on me, but as of right now, it's just not as good as their previous albums. In fact, I'd probably say it's their worst, at least since With Odin on Our Side, which came out back in like 2004. So I would say it's probably their weakest album in like 15 years, at least. So, yeah. Next up at number 17, I got Moritat by Der Rote Milan. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right either. It's a black metal album. And unfortunately, much like the Aerorados album that I talked about a couple minutes ago, the best thing about this album is the artwork. It's still a decent album, I still enjoyed it, it's just not really something that I can really see myself going back to all that much. Next, we've got The Simulation by Born of Osiris. This was one that I was actually kind of looking forward to since at the time that this album was announced, I was like super heavily into Born of Osiris. I still like them quite a bit, but I don't listen to them like constantly like I did towards the end of last year. I do still enjoy this album. It has some pretty solid songs on it. Cycles of Tragedy and Under the Gun I think are pretty good. Silence the Echo is the first single off the album, probably my favorite song on it. I believe they're intending to release another album this year since this one is only 8 tracks. And I believe that's because they are releasing another album this year, so I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, not an incredible album, but still pretty good. Next up at number 15, we've got The Valley by Whitechapel. This was my first Whitechapel album. Actually, several albums on this list are actually my first albums from some of the bands. The Valley is my first Whitechapel album. I've never really been a huge fan of them. I think they're okay, but I never thought they were that great. But this was a really solid album. I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's not really so much of a straight deathcore album, which I really liked. It's got some acoustic sections, it's got some clean singing vocals, kind of mixes things up a little bit, so it's still definitely a very heavy deathcore album, but at the same time it's got these melodic sections that really add a lot and really kind of push the boundaries of deathcore in a good way. And I really appreciate that. Unfortunately, I just don't go back to it all that much aside from the song When a Demon Defiles the Witch. That's the only song I really go back to, but still a good album for sure. Next at number 14 is The Verdict by Queensryche. This is a fantastic album, but in the end I just don't go back to it a whole lot, which is really the only reason it's so low. Other than that, I would have this a bit higher. It is a really good album, kind of reminds me of Iron Maiden a little bit. This is a progressive metal band, and they kind of got that sort of Iron Maiden sort of feel to them. They kind of sound quite a bit like them, if Iron Maiden was like a prog band, which is pretty cool. I think that's Iron Maiden, of course, is an incredible band. So kind of putting more of a prog spin on that is pretty neat. I just don't go back to it a whole lot, but it is still for sure a fantastic album. Next up is Hell by the band Tyr. I think that it might not be how it's pronounced, but that's how I'm going to pronounce it anyway. These guys are I guess they're technically a progressive folk metal band. I've been a fan of them for a few years now, actually, probably since like 2016 maybe. But I never really sat down and listened to any of their albums beginning to end. This is actually my first album that I've actually heard start to finish by them, just because folk metal isn't really my thing, but I do think these guys are one of the better bands that I've heard. And this was a really solid album. I enjoyed it a lot. There was some really good songs on here. I really enjoyed the opening song, Gates of Hell, which I believe is the only song on this album with screamed or growled vocals. They really don't use them all that often, so it was cool that they included that in there. I also really enjoy Downhill Drunk, Sunset Shore, Fire and Flame. There's some pretty good songs on here. I don't really go back to it all that much, but it is a solid album. Next, at number 12, I've got one of the most highly anticipated metal albums of the year for many people. Not so much for me, I've never been a massive fan of these guys, but this is definitely one of the most highly anticipated albums in general, and that is the self-titled album by Rammstein. Rammstein is a band that I do enjoy. I think they're a good band, I just don't like them as much as other industrial metal bands. Personally, Icebreaker is probably my favorite one. As far as the German bands go, they're one of my favorite bands of all time, really. But Rammstein is really good too, and this is a very enjoyable album. It's got some pretty solid songs on it, like Deutschland and Ausländer, which is probably my favorite song on the album. It's really good. Haven't gone back to it a whole lot, but I will admit, the song Ausländer is probably my favorite song on the album. I've had that stuck in my head on multiple occasions since I listened to this album. So, it is very good, and I would definitely recommend you check it out. Next up at number 11 is one of the albums I was looking forward to the most this year, and that is Pantheon of the Nightside Gods by Belzebubs. This is an actually really interesting band because it's entirely based on a comic strip, kind of a comedy comic strip of a black metal sort of band. Somehow, I'm not sure how it came about, but it happened that he was able to find some different musicians who were able to put together an actual album based on the comic, and kind of what the band would sound like if they were to be real. So these guys are kind of melodic death metal mixed with black metal, kind of like Insomnium if they were a little bit more symphonic influenced and black metal influenced is kind of how I like to think of it. The vocalist of this band is Nilo from Insomnium, which I think is pretty cool. Aside from that, none of the other band members are known. It's kind of like a supergroup, basically. But this is a really enjoyable album. I do like it a lot. There's some really solid songs on here. The title track is really good. Cathedrals of Mourning is another really good one. Blackened Call was the very first single from the album. That's a good song. My favorite song on the album, though, is probably Nam Gloria Lucifer, which is kind of a more black metal influenced song, and it just has this really awesome sound that I really enjoy a lot. It's a really good album. Not going to be for everyone, but I do really enjoy it. Next up, I've got the album Resist by Within Temptation. This is an album that I originally had much higher, but it's kind of moved down as the year has gone on because I really enjoyed it a lot when it first came out, but I've kind of stepped back away from it a little bit. I still think it's a very good album for sure. It might be kind of disappointing for long-time fans of the band because these guys are known as being like a symphonic metal band, kind of in the vein of Nightwish or something like that. This album is more of kind of an alternative metal mixed with like some electronics, some symphonic stuff, and kind of that sort of thing, but it is still a really good album. I do enjoy it. Songs like Endless War, which is probably my favorite song on the album, Supernova, and Raise Your Banner, which actually features Anders Frieden from In Flames. Those are all really good songs, so it is a solid album. Next up at number 9, I've got The Heretics by Rotting Christ. This is another one that I thought about having higher because I have actually gone back to a few songs from here very regularly. I really enjoy quite a few songs on here. Heaven and Hell and Fire and In the Name of God, plus a couple others. In the end, there's really only a few songs I go back to from this album, but it is still a really good album. It's a black metal album, but one thing I like about Rotting Christ is that they're kind of a different style from like the typical Norwegian black metal bands like Dark Throne, Immortal, Mayhem, stuff like that. These guys are from Greece, so they get a little bit of a different feel to them, which is pretty cool. And yeah, overall it's a really solid album. Next up I've got When a Shadow's Forced into the Light by Swallow the Sun. This was, I believe, one of the first albums I heard this year. I really enjoyed it. It's one that I've gone back to quite a bit. It's kind of a melodic death metal meets doom metal sort of thing. It's a very slower pace, more atmospheric sort of album, which I really like. It is a really good album. It's got some really great moments in it. It's got some great melodies. The vocals are good. The lyrics are good. You know, it's overall just a really solid package. There's some really good songs on here too, my favorites being The Crimson Crown and Here on the Black Earth, I think it's called. So it's a really good album. I definitely recommend checking it out. Next up at number 7 is Distance Over Time by Dream Theater. Dream Theater is a band that I've kind of gotten into a little bit lately. I haven't listened to a ton of their stuff, but I have listened to a little bit of pretty much everything from some of their albums. This is the only album so far that I've heard beginning to end. I do actually really enjoy this album. It's pretty solid overall. Some really good songs on it. The performances overall are pretty good. I will say the production in some places seems a little bit weird. I'm not sure what it is about it, but some places it just sounds off. I don't know what it is. It's still a good album. That's not really a huge problem. There's some really good songs on here like At Wit's End, Untethered Angel, Pale Blue Dot. I also really like Paralyzed as well, even though it's one of the simpler songs on the album. I think it's pretty effective. It actually sounds an awful lot like a Breaking Benjamin song, which I thought was kind of weird for, you know, a progressive metal band like Dream Theater. But, you know, I think it was still done pretty effectively. But it is overall a really solid album. I enjoy it. Next up at number 6, we get another progressive metal album, which is Hail Stand by Periphery. Again, this is my first Periphery album. I've been a fan of them for a little while, but I never really dug that deep into them. I really enjoyed this album a lot. It's got some really solid songs on it. The opening, Reptile, which is like 16 minutes long, is a really good song. I also enjoy Blood Eagle, which is another one of the singles. It's probably one of the heavier songs on the album. And then also the song It's Only Smiles, which might be my favorite song on the album, but it's hard to say between It's Only Smiles and Reptile. Those are both really good songs. But yeah, it's overall a really solid album, some great riffs, great performances, great vocals, so I definitely recommend checking it out if you're into prog. Next up at number 5, I've got Peace by Demon Hunter. I mean, I'm kind of biased towards Demon Hunter anyway. I've been a fan of them for such a long time, and I was very excited for these albums, War and Peace, but I gotta say I think they are some of the best albums of the year, honestly. But anyways, number 5 is Peace. I really enjoy this album a lot. It is probably their most experimental album to date, which I really like. Yeah, overall it's just really good. It's got some great songs on it like More Than Bones, Recuse Myself, Loneliness, Fear's Not My Guide, When the Devil Come. A lot of great songs on it, and I really enjoy it a lot. And likewise, at number 4, I've got the companion piece to Peace, which is War. This is the heavier album of the two, and honestly I have a hard time choosing which one's better. But I would say War is slightly better because Peace has a couple of songs I don't really care for, which are Time Only Takes and Two Ways, whereas War only has one song I don't really care for that much, which is No Place For You Here. Overall, it's a really solid album. It's got some great songs like On My Side, Lesser Gods, Close Enough. You know, there's some really good songs on here, and it's one of Demon Hunter's best albums as well, I think. Number 3 is From Hell With Love by Beast in Black. This was my favorite album of the year until like a month or two ago. I really enjoy this album a lot. It's a power metal album. It's just kind of a fun album to listen to. I mean, if you want something that's just catchy and fun and energetic, then definitely check this album out because I think it's got all of that. Kind of reminds me of like 80s metal, kind of like the hair metal, glam metal or something like that, kind of meets power metal, which I think is really neat. And it works out very well. I think everything about this album is actually really good. There's some great songs on here, and overall it's just a really solid album. Next Next up at number 2, I have Panihida by Batushka. Now this is actually a bit of a weird album because there are two versions of Batushka right now. There's a bunch of legal stuff going on between the two versions of the band. One of them is led by the ex-vocalist of the band, who basically stole the band from the original creator, and the original creator of the band released this album. Currently, they're not technically supposed to play any shows or release material while the court stuff is in process, as far as I know. The fake version of the band is going to be performing shows, and is still performing shows as of right now, actually, and releasing an album under Metal Blade Records next month, which is kind of annoying. But the creator did put his album on Bandcamp and on YouTube, so I have listened to it, and it's the band's second album. It's just as good as their first one, which their first one, in my opinion, was an absolutely incredible album. These guys are a really unique band. They're a really great band. They got some really, really cool stuff in their music that I really enjoy a lot. Yeah, it's overall just a really solid album. And at number 1, I've got Empath by Devin Townsend. It's kind of hard for me to decide between the top 3, which is my favorite album, because I enjoy them all for very different reasons. But Empath is just a really solid album. It's not really strictly a progressive metal album. It kind of takes elements from all different genres of music and blends them together into this one package. Really shows a lot of Devin Townsend's influences. It's a very creative album, which is one of the things I like the most about it. There's some things in here that are very kind of weird and seem almost out of place, but they actually work really well. And it's just overall a really creative album, a very fun album to listen to, kind of all over the place in a good way, I guess. It's overall just a really great album, and I really enjoy it a lot. So that's pretty much it for this video. Let me know what you guys think. What are some of your favorite albums of the year? And all of those kinds of things. Are there any more that you're looking forward to for the rest of the year? And that is pretty much it for this video, so I will see you guys next time.